She burned it at 2 a.m. Standing over her kitchen sink in a borrowed apartment she could barely afford, Zuri Brooks touched the corner of the ultrasound image to the flame of a lighter and watched it curl black. The baby inside was 9 weeks along. The father was engaged to someone else. And the man, the one who had held her face like she was something rare, something worth keeping, had never once mentioned that detail during the 3 days she believed, like a fool, that something real was beginning. She didn't cry. She'd already done that. What she felt instead was something colder, a decision forming in the space where hope used to be. She let the image burn all the way to her fingers before she dropped it. That was 4 months ago. If you have ever loved someone who belonged to a world you didn't know existed, you already understand what Zuri was carrying. And if you've ever tried to disappear from a man who has never once, in his entire life, lost anything he decided to keep, then you know this story doesn't end with the burning. It never does. Welcome. If this is your first time here, hit that like button and drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Subscribe and stay with me until the end. Because what happens next in Zuri's life will change everything you think you know about love, power, and the price of keeping secrets from the wrong man. The night Zuri Brooks met Kong Min Jai, she was not supposed to be at that rooftop. She was supposed to be at her friend Dana's goodbye dinner. A Tuesday night potluck in a cramped Itaewon apartment crowded with expat nurses, bad wine, and a playlist Dana had been curating since 2019. But Zuri arrived 40 minutes late, dressed wrong for the weather, to find a handwritten note taped to the door. Changed plans. Park Hyatt rooftop. Come if you want. She almost didn't go. Her feet hurt. She had a double shift the next morning. She was 29 years old and had been living in Seoul for 14 months, on a healthcare exchange contract that paid just enough to make her feel like she was building something, but never quite enough to feel safe. She went because Dana was leaving for good, and Zuri didn't know when she'd have another reason to wear the green dress. The elevator opened onto a rooftop that smelled like cedar smoke and cold air. The Han River stretched below in both directions, all light and black water, and for a moment she forgot she was tired. She found Dana near the fire pit, already 3 glasses deep into something expensive, and they hugged like they hadn't seen each other in a year, even though it had only been 2 weeks. She didn't notice him for almost an hour. When she did, it wasn't because he was loud. It was the opposite. He was the stillest person on that rooftop, seated at the edge of a group, not quite part of it, holding a glass he hadn't touched. He wore a dark suit with no tie, collar open, and he was watching the river like he was trying to solve something about it. Dana noticed Zuri noticing. "Don't," Dana said, not unkindly. "I wasn't." "You absolutely were. And that one—" Dana tilted her chin toward him without looking, the practiced discretion of someone who'd lived abroad long enough to develop rooftop etiquette, "is not someone you do casual with. You know him?" "I know the energy." Dana sipped her drink. "That's the energy of a man who doesn't ask twice." Zuri looked away. She ordered a club soda from a passing server and told herself she was going to say goodbye to Dana properly, exchange numbers with 2 other nurses she'd been meaning to keep in touch with, and leave by midnight. She was at the railing alone at 11:15 looking at the river when he appeared beside her. He didn't introduce himself with his name first. That was the thing she'd think about later. He said, "You've been watching the water the same way I have. What are you trying to figure out?" His Korean carried almost no accent when he switched to English a half-second later, as though he'd caught himself and corrected. His English was careful, slightly formal, like someone who'd learned it from books before people. Zuri turned to look at him directly. That was her first mistake, or her first good decision, depending on how you count. "Whether it looks different," she said, "if you've lived here long enough." "Does it?" "I don't know yet. I've only been here 14 months. "I've been here my entire life," he said. "It still surprises me." His name, when he finally gave it, was Min Jae. He didn't offer a last name. She didn't ask. She told him she was a nurse. He said he worked in private asset management, which was vague enough that she filed it and moved on. They talked for 40 minutes about things that had nothing to do with either of their real lives. A book she'd read twice and he'd never finished. The specific exhaustion of night shifts. Whether cities have personalities, or whether people just project onto them. He listened the way almost nobody listens, without waiting for his turn. When Dana came to find her at midnight to say the real goodbye, Zuri had already given him her number. She walked to the elevator, replaying the conversation in her head and wondering if she'd imagined how carefully he had looked at her. She hadn't imagined it. He texted before she reached her apartment, "I'm glad you came to the rooftop." She stared at the message for a full minute before she typed back, "Me too. 3 days. That's what they had. 3 days that felt like they existed outside the rules of her normal life." He took her to a restaurant that wasn't in any guide she'd ever seen, tucked below a staircase in a building with no sign, where the chef came out and talked to him like an old friend. He showed up at a farmer's market she'd mentioned in passing. She'd said it offhandedly, not as an invitation, and somehow that felt like the most romantic thing anyone had done for her in years. Not grand, just remembered. On the third night, in his apartment, which she would later understand was one of several, not his actual home, she asked him if he was happy. He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that meant he was actually thinking about it rather than reaching for the easy answer. "I'm not sure I've asked myself that recently," he finally said. "That's an answer," she told him. He looked at her then with something she couldn't name, not longing exactly, more like recognition, like she'd said aloud a word he'd been searching for. She left the next morning. He kissed her at the door and said he'd call her. She believed him. She took the subway home, made coffee, and sat with the feeling that something was starting. The call never came. 3 days of silence became a week. A week became 2. She went back to her shifts, her narrow apartment, her routines. She told herself she was fine. She had been disappointed before and survived it. She was an adult woman with work that mattered, and a life she'd built by herself, far from home. She didn't need a man who couldn't manage a phone call. Then one of the nurses she'd met at Dana's goodbye party sent her a link with a single message. "Isn't this the guy from the rooftop?" The article was in English, pulled from a Korean financial publication. There was a photograph, him, unmistakably, in a different suit, standing outside a building that looked like it cost more than her hospital, and a headline about a merger between two companies she'd never heard of. But it wasn't the business story that stopped her breathing. It was the sidebar, a social column. A photograph of him at a charity gala 2 nights before he'd met her, and beside him a woman in a white silk dress, and the caption, "Kang Min-jae and his fiancée, Lee Soo-yeon, at the annual Dragon Empire Foundation Gala." Fiancé. Zuri read the word 3 times. Then she put her phone face down on the counter and stood there with her hands pressed flat against the surface until her breathing steadied. She did not call him. She did not send a message. She deleted his contact. She went to her next shift and she did her job. And she came home. And she did not let herself cry until the shower was running, which was the only privacy she felt she had anymore. 2 weeks later, she bought a test because her body told her to, and the result sat on the edge of her sink for 11 minutes before she could make herself look at it. Positive. She sat down on the bathroom floor. The tile was cold through her scrubs. She sat there until her legs went numb, and then she sat there a little longer because sometimes the body needs more time than the mind does to absorb the thing that's actually happening. She was pregnant. By a man who was engaged. By a man whose last name she'd had to learn from a news article. She made the appointment. She went to the clinic. She sat in the chair and they put the wand against her and the sound that came through the machine. She wasn't prepared for the sound. She left with an ultrasound image and a follow-up appointment and a referral pamphlet. She stuffed in her pocket without reading. She rode the subway home. She sat at her kitchen table and she looked at the image for a long time. Then she made a decision. She was not going to contact him. She was not going to interrupt his life, his engagement, his empire, whatever that meant, whatever he actually was beneath the vague description of private asset management. She was going to figure out how to do this alone. She had come to Seoul alone. She had built her life here alone. She was not going to become a complication in a powerful man's carefully arranged world. She called her mother in Atlanta. Didn't tell her everything, said she was thinking about coming home early, maybe before her contract ended. Her mother didn't push. She knew her daughter well enough to hear what wasn't being said. That night at 2 a.m., Zuri stood at the kitchen sink and burned the ultrasound. She thought it would feel like closing a door. It felt like nothing, which scared her more than grief would have. She didn't come home early. She renewed her contract. She found a new apartment in a quieter neighborhood and gave herself the only rule she thought she could keep: survive this one day at a time. Her body had other plans. The pregnancy was not invisible for long. By month 4, she was adjusting her scrubs, working around the fatigue, eating whatever her body would accept before a shift. The other nurses noticed. She told them the father wasn't in the picture, which was true enough. Nobody pushed. In an ER, people respect the right to keep certain things brief. She was good at her job. That was the one thing that had never changed, no matter what was happening around it. In the emergency room, she was precise, steady, fast when she needed to be fast, and patient in exactly the ways that the job demanded. She didn't take her personal life through the hospital doors. Whatever was breaking inside her stayed outside. Until the night Kong Min-jae came through the emergency room doors with blood on his jacket, and terror he was trying not to show, carrying a man who worked for him who had 3 bullets in his chest. Zuri was at the triage station. She was the one who looked up. The man he was carrying was handed off to the trauma team within seconds. There were procedures, controlled chaos, the vocabulary of a crisis that everyone in the room already knew. She was moving, gloved, mask on, already working. And then someone grabbed her elbow to redirect her to a secondary patient, and she turned, and across 15 feet of fluorescent emergency room space, she and Kong Min-jae looked at each other. He was still. The way he had been still on the rooftop all those months ago. The same quality of quiet in the middle of everything loud. But his eyes moved to her stomach. Her body, 5 months along now, impossible to mistake. And the look on his face changed into something she couldn't read fast enough to prepare for. Something that wasn't shock exactly, but was bigger than recognition. And before she could move or speak or tell herself to look away, she heard him say her name. Not loudly, almost quietly, like he was checking whether she was real. Zuri. The trauma team was still working. Someone called her name from the other direction. She turned away from him because her patient needed her, and because turning away was the only thing she knew how to do. She lasted 17 minutes before she found a supply closet and put her back against the shelves and pressed her hands against her face and breathed. 17 minutes. She'd had 4 months to build the wall, 4 months of daily maintenance, and it had taken him 11 seconds to find the door. When she came back out, she hoped, that the controlled chaos of the emergency room would have pulled him somewhere else, into a waiting area, into paperwork, into the system that usually separated people into their proper lanes. He was standing in the hallway outside the supply closet door. He had not gone anywhere. I was looking at her with the expression of a man who has just understood something enormous and is choosing very carefully what to do with the understanding. "How long?" he said, quietly. His voice did not shake, but something behind his eyes did. "How long have you known?" Zuri looked at him for a long moment. The hallway smelled like antiseptic. The PA system called out codes in the background. Someone rolled a gurney past them, and neither of them moved. She thought about the kitchen sink at 2 a.m. She thought about the tile floor of her bathroom, and her numb legs, and the sound the machine had made. She thought about every morning she had gotten up and carried this alone because she had decided clearly and deliberately, that she was never going to be his problem. "Long enough," she said. And then her pager went off and she walked away from him, back into the emergency room, back into the only place she had ever been completely sure of herself. Behind her, she heard him say very quietly, to no one in particular, "That's mine." Not "she's mine." Not possessive the way fear sounds. It was different from that. It was the sound of a man realizing he almost lost something before he knew he had it. She didn't stop walking, but her hands, for the first time in 4 months, were shaking. She didn't look back. That was the rule she gave herself walking back through the emergency room doors. Don't look back. Don't check whether he was still standing there. Don't give the moment any more oxygen than it had already taken. She had a patient. She had a job. She had 11 more hours on her shift and a body that ached at the hip joints by hour 7 on a good day. She looked back. He was still in the hallway, standing exactly where she'd left him, hands at his sides, watching her go. The look on his face was not the look of a man who was leaving. She turned away and walked faster. The next 2 hours ran the way bad ER nights always do. Not with dramatic catastrophe, but with the grinding accumulation of need, one patient after another, each one requiring a full version of her while she was already running on the fractions left over from the one before. A construction worker with a hand injury that was worse than it looked. A grandmother with chest pressure and a daughter who kept interrupting the triage questions. A teenager who'd been in a car she shouldn't have been in, with people she wouldn't name, who needed stitches, and a nurse who wasn't going to ask too many questions because sometimes silence is the only safe container you can offer someone. Zuri moved through all of it. That was what she did. She moved through it. At the 2-hour mark, she went to the break room to eat something, crackers and a protein bar, what passed for dinner on a night like this, and found her colleague Minseo already in there with both hands wrapped around a coffee she wasn't drinking. Minseo looked up, looked at Zuri's face, put the coffee down. "The man in the expensive jacket," Minseo said. "You know him." It wasn't a question. Minseo had worked trauma for 6 years, and she read people the way other people read street signs, fast, automatic, and usually right. "It's complicated," Zuri said. "He hasn't left." Zuri stopped opening the crackers. "What?" "He's in the family waiting area. His guy is in surgery. He's been there since they took him up." Minseo picked her coffee back up. "He asked about you, at the nursing station, asked if you were on shift all night." The crackers felt like cardboard in Zuri's hand. "What did they tell him?" Ji-young told him patient information is confidential and staff schedules are not public. Minseo paused. He didn't argue. He just nodded and went back to the waiting area. "Okay." "Zuri, I heard you." "He looked at you like, Minseo." Minseo stopped. She was a good friend because she knew when to stop. She picked up her coffee again and looked at the wall and said nothing else, which was its own kind of kindness. Zuri ate the crackers standing up. They tasted like pressed air. Her lower back had started its nightly complaint, a dull, persistent pressure that she'd learned to ignore until she couldn't. She pressed her palm flat against her lower back and breathed and thought, with a clarity that surprised her. "I am too tired for this. I am genuinely, physically, in every possible way too tired for whatever this is about to become." She went back to the floor. He was waiting at the edge of the corridor, not in the family area anymore. He had moved precisely to the boundary of where staff were allowed to redirect visitors, and he was standing there with the patience of someone who understood that patience, deployed correctly, is its own kind of pressure. "You can't be in this area," she said, not slowing down. "I know." He fell into step beside her. "I'll go back. I just need 2 minutes. I'm working." "I can see that." "Then you can see I don't have 2 minutes." "Zuri?" His voice didn't rise. That was the thing about him she remembered. He never needed volume to get your attention. He had some other quality, some frequency, that her body apparently still responded to without asking her permission. "Please." She stopped. Not because of the please. She told herself it wasn't because of the please, but because stopping was faster than arguing, and she needed this conversation to be over. She turned to face him. In the fluorescent light, he looked like what he was, a man who had been awake for a long time, holding something together through force of will. His jacket was gone. She realized someone must have taken it, the one with the blood. His shirt was dark, collar still open. He had a cut above his left eyebrow she hadn't noticed before, small and dried over, the kind of thing that happens in the kind of night she was starting to understand he'd had. 2 minutes, she said. Clock's running. Something crossed his face. Not quite relief, because relief would have been soft, and nothing about him was soft, more like a door unlocking. You were going to disappear, he said, again. I didn't disappear the first time. You stopped calling. He absorbed that without flinching. I know. So we're done. That's the whole story. Zuri, what do you want me to say? You want me to explain myself to you? Her voice stayed low, controlled, but there was something underneath it with pressure behind it. You want to know why I didn't call? Why I didn't find some way to... She stopped, breathed, restarted, quieter. I saw the photograph, the article. I know who you are. I know you have a fiancé. I made a decision about what was mine to carry, and I carried it. You don't get to show up here and make that into something I owe you an explanation for. He was quiet for a moment. In the background, the hospital ran itself. Intercoms, footsteps, the particular ambient hum of a building that never fully sleeps. The engagement, he said. It's not... Don't. Her voice went flat. Don't tell me what it is or isn't. I've heard that before, and I don't mean from you. I mean, I have heard that exact sentence before, and I know exactly where it ends. She looked at him directly. You were engaged when we met. You said nothing. I should have. Yes. I know that. Good. She shifted her weight. Her back was really hurting now. Your lieutenant is in surgery. Someone will come out to update you when there's news. You should be in the waiting area. Are you healthy? He asked. Are you? He stopped. His eyes went to her stomach and then back to her face, and she watched him try to assemble a sentence from pieces that didn't fit the kind of conversations he was apparently built for. Is the baby? The baby is fine. And you? I'm at work. That's not what I asked. It's the answer I have available right now. She turned away. Waiting area, Mr. Kang. She walked. She didn't run, because running would have meant something, and she was committed to this meaning. Nothing. To treating it like a thing she could process in the break room later and file somewhere manageable. She pushed through the doors to the main floor and went straight to her next patient and did not think about the hallway for 11 minutes. 11 minutes. Then she thought about it constantly for the rest of the shift. At 6 a.m., when the night crew started handing off to the morning team, she learned that Min Jae's lieutenant, a man named Park Sung-woo, 34 years old, no listed next of kin, had survived surgery. Critical, but stable. He would probably keep the kidney they'd been worried about. He was going to have a long recovery and a worse scar, but he was alive. She heard this from the surgical resident at handoff and felt a complicated relief that she didn't examine closely. She changed out of her scrubs in the locker room. Put on the clothes she'd arrived in, loose trousers, a maternity top her mother had sent from home, a cardigan that had gotten too short in the front. She tied her hair back, gathered her bag, and walked out through the main exit into the pale soul morning. He was on the steps, not lurking, not hiding it. Sitting on the top step with his forearms on his knees looking out at the street, and when he heard the doors he turned and stood in one motion. She stopped. I'm not following you, he said immediately. I'm asking. 5 minutes. Somewhere you choose, coffee, outside, wherever, and then I'll go. She looked at him. The morning light was honest in a way that fluorescent light wasn't. He looked tired. Not the performing kind of tired, the real kind, the kind that settles behind the eyes and doesn't go anywhere regardless of posture. She thought about saying no. She thought about exactly how she would say it and what she would do next. Call a cab, go home, eat something real, sleep until the afternoon with her feet elevated the way the midwife had told her to. There's a cafe, she said. 3 blocks. They don't know me there. He nodded. He didn't say thank you. She respected that. They walked the 3 blocks in silence. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that has too many words crowded behind it, pressing. The cafe was quiet. Corner table. She ordered tea because coffee had stopped sitting right at month 3. He ordered nothing, which she noticed. She thought maybe he didn't trust himself to speak normally while doing 2 things at once. She waited. I looked for you, he said. After. I tried to call and the number was disconnected. I thought. He stopped, started over. I thought you'd chosen to end it. I thought that was your answer. I changed my number, she said. I wasn't hiding. I just stopped. She wrapped both hands around the mug. The warmth helped. I stopped needing to be findable. I went back to the rooftop bar. I asked the staff. He said it plainly, no attempt to make it sound romantic. I didn't have enough information about you. I knew your name and that you were a nurse and the neighborhood you mentioned. That's not enough to find someone in Seoul who doesn't want to be found. She looked at him. You looked for me. For 2 months? She let that sit. She didn't know what to do with it, so she set it aside for later. And then you stopped? His jaw tightened slightly. There were situations in my work, things that required my full attention for a period of time. He said it the way people say things they've learned not to say directly. I didn't stop. I got delayed. Your work, she said. He looked at her steadily. Yes. The private asset management. The pause was 1 second too long. That's part of it. She looked at the table, then back at him. I know who you are, she said quietly. I looked. After I saw the article. I wanted to understand what I had. She chose the word carefully. What I had walked into. She kept her voice even. I know about the Dragon Empire. I know about the syndicates. I know what the papers say about what your family built and what you do to keep it. The cafe was nearly empty. A barista wiped the counter in the background. No one was paying attention to them. Min Jae didn't look away from her. He didn't minimize it. He didn't reach for an easy contradiction. He sat with it for a moment, and then he said, "What do you want to know?" "I want to know if my child is in danger because of what you are." The sentence landed between them like something dropped from a height. She watched his face change in real time, not falling apart, nothing that dramatic, but a series of small adjustments, a man recalibrating around a question that had gone somewhere he hadn't expected. "No," he said, and then, "Not if I have anything to do with it." That's a qualified answer. It's the honest one. His hands were flat on the table. "I can tell you nothing will touch you or the baby, and I can mean it, and I can believe it. And I can also know that the world I operate in doesn't always respond to what I mean or believe. I'm not going to lie to you about that." She was quiet for a moment. "Okay. Okay. It's a better answer than most people would give me." Something shifted in the space between them. Not warmth exactly. More like the beginning of a different kind of conversation. Not combative, not safe, but honest in a way that was its own particular danger. "The engagement," she said. "Tell me." He exhaled. Not dramatically, just the exhale of a man preparing to say something true. "It was arranged when I was 26, between my family and the Lee family. Business, political access, territory, all of it tied together in a structure that benefits both organizations." He paused. "Lee Soo-yeon is not a bad person. She knows exactly what the arrangement is. She never had any illusions about it being something else." "But you haven't ended it." "No." "Why?" "Because ending it has consequences that go beyond me. Breaking that arrangement doesn't just end a personal commitment. It moves alliances, shifts power, creates opportunities for other people to press into gaps." His voice was flat, informational. "I have been planning how to do it without starting a war. That takes time." She looked at him. "And our—" She stopped. Started again. "Did you know? Before last night, did you know about the baby?" His answer mattered more than anything else he'd said, and she watched his face carefully as he gave it. "No," he said. "I swear to you, I did not know." She believed him. She didn't want to believe him. Believing him made things more complicated, not less. But she watched his face when he said it, and there was no construction in it. Just the raw disorientation of a man who had walked into a hospital with one crisis and found a different and larger one waiting. She finished her tea. It had gone slightly cool. She wrapped her hands around the mug anyway, because the pressure felt good. "I'm not asking you for anything," she said. "I want you to understand that. I'm not asking for money or protection or for you to restructure your life around a decision you didn't make." "You're not asking," he said slowly, "but I'm telling you, I want to be part of this. Min-jae, I know I have no standing. I know what I did wrong, and I know I don't get to walk in here and make demands." He leaned forward slightly. "I'm not making demands. I'm asking. There's a difference, and I know the difference." She looked at him for a long time. Outside the cafe window, Seoul was starting its morning in earnest. Foot traffic picking up, a vendor unlocking the shutters of a shop across the street, two women walking fast with their heads down against the cold. "I have a prenatal appointment Thursday," she said finally. 11 in the morning. He waited. "I'm not inviting you," she said. "I'm telling you it exists. What you do with that information is your choice." He nodded once. He understood exactly what she had and hadn't said. She stood. Her back protested the movement. She gathered her bag and her cardigan, and for a moment she just stood there, and Min-jae stood too, and they were close enough that she could see the dried cut above his eyebrow clearly and the specific way exhaustion had thinned the skin under his eyes. "Go home," she said. "Sleep. I'll have someone drive you. I'll take a cab." "Zuri?" "I'll take a cab," she repeated, and the firmness in her voice was not unkind, just fixed. "Thank you for the—" She gestured at her tea, which he hadn't ordered or paid for. She'd paid for it herself. The sentence didn't land the way she meant it. Get some sleep." She left. She got a cab 2 blocks away and sat in the back and let herself breathe for the first time since 10 p.m. the night before. The driver had the radio on low, some morning talk program, voices she couldn't quite follow in Korean. The city went past the window. She was 5 months pregnant. She was exhausted in every layer of herself. And she pressed her fingers to her forehead. She had just told him about the appointment. Not invited him, told him. which was a distinction she was going to need to think very carefully about, because distinctions like that were either protective or delusional, and she wasn't sure which one this was yet. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She stared at it. She answered. "How did you get this number?" she said. "I had it before." His voice was lower on the phone than in person. "You changed it. This is the new one." "I've had this number for 4 months." "I know." She closed her eyes. "Min Jae. I'm not going to call you constantly. I just needed you to know that the number works." A pause. Thursday, 11 a.m. "Which clinic?" She should have said nothing. She knew she should have said nothing. She told him the name of the clinic. She hung up. She put the phone in her lap. The cab turned onto her street and she watched her building come into view. Ordinary, a little tired, the kind of building that nobody photographs. And she thought, I just opened a door. I don't know if I meant to. She went upstairs. She ate. She lay down on her left side the way you're supposed to, with a pillow between her knees. She thought she wouldn't be able to sleep because her brain was still running the previous 14 hours in a loop. She was asleep in 4 minutes. She didn't dream. Or if she did, she didn't remember it. What she woke up to, 3 hours later, was the sound of her phone buzzing on the nightstand and a name on the screen she didn't recognize. She answered without thinking about it, which was the exhaustion. The voice on the other end was a woman's. Polished Korean English, practiced and precise. "Miss Brooks." Not a question. "My name is Lee Soo-yeon. I think you know who I am." Zuri sat up slowly. The pillow fell. She put her feet on the floor and sat at the edge of the bed and felt the day rearrange itself around her into something she hadn't prepared for. "I'd like to meet," the woman said. "Today, if possible. I think we have things to discuss that Min Jae would prefer we didn't." Zuri's hand tightened on the phone. "Why would I do that?" she said. "Because I know things about the situation you're in," Lee Soo-yeon said. Her voice was not unkind. It was something more unsettling than unkind. It was measured, controlled. The voice of a woman who had thought this through. "And because what I know could either protect you or destroy you, depending on what you decide in the next 72 hours. The floor was cold under Zuri's feet. "Where?" she said. The address Lee Soo-yeon gave her was a hotel in Gangnam. "Neutral territory," she said. "Public enough." She said it like a woman who understood exactly what neutral territory meant and had chosen accordingly. Zuri hung up and sat with the phone in both hands. She thought about calling Min Jae. She thought about what he would say. "Don't go. I'll handle it. Stay where you are." And she knew he would mean all of it. And she also knew that a man who commands by instinct cannot always see the places where command stops helping and starts being its own kind of cage. She thought about Lee Soo-yeon's voice. Not threatening, not panicked, just prepared. The voice of someone who had already run the options and picked the one she could live with. She stood. She got dressed. She found her shoes. She made a decision she knew Min Jae was going to be furious about, and she made it anyway, because the baby moving inside her at that exact moment, a slow roll, a pressure under her ribs, something that felt like an elbow or a knee, something unmistakably present, reminded her that she was not the only person her decisions belonged to anymore. She took a cab to Gangnam. She walked into the hotel lobby and found Lee Soo-yeon already waiting at a corner table by the window. A woman in her early 30s, dark hair, a posture that spoke of a specific kind of discipline, and eyes that were already reading Zuri with an intelligence that made Zuri's spine straighten involuntarily. They looked at each other across the lobby for one moment before Zuri crossed the floor. She sat down. Lee Soo-yeon folded her hands on the table and said, "He doesn't know I know about you. Not yet. But there are people in his organization who have been watching your hospital for 3 weeks, and those people don't all answer to Min Jae." The air in the lobby was carefully temperature-controlled. Too comfortable. The kind of environment designed to make people feel safe enough to say things they shouldn't. Zuri said, "Who do they answer to?" And Lee Soo-yeon said, "That's the part you need to understand before Thursday." Lee Soo-yeon did not look like a woman delivering a warning. She looked like a woman who had already grieved something and come out the other side into a colder, more functional place. Her tea sat untouched. Her hands stayed folded. She watched Zuri settle into the chair across from her with the careful attention of someone who had prepared for multiple versions of this conversation and was now identifying which one she was in. Zuri did not say anything immediately. She had learned in 11 years of emergency nursing that the person who speaks first in a silence usually needs something from the silence. She waited. Lee Soo-yeon said, "How much do you know about the structure of the Dragon Empire?" "Enough to be sitting here instead of hanging up the phone." A small nod. Not approval exactly. Acknowledgement. Min-jae controls the outer organization, the syndicate operations, the territory arrangements, the alliances with the other families. What most people, including most people inside the organization, don't know is that there is an inner council. 3 men. They were part of his father's original structure. They predate Min-jae's leadership by 15 years. Zuri was very still. And they still have power. They have the kind of power that doesn't require a title. Lee Soo-yeon's voice was even, precise, the voice of a woman who had rehearsed this because she'd needed to rehearse it to get through it. Min-jae inherited the Dragon Empire at 24 when his father died. He was young. He was brilliant. He consolidated power faster than anyone expected. But he consolidated the visible power. The council remained because they were useful, and because removing them would have required a war he wasn't ready to fight at 24. What does this have to do with my hospital? The council knows about you, not because Min-jae told them, because one of the men Min-jae trusts most inside his organization has been feeding information to the council for 8 months. She paused, and for the first time something moved behind her composed expression, something that looked like it cost her. His name is Ryu Jae-won. He has been Min-jae's head of security for 4 years. The name meant nothing to Zuri. The information behind it meant everything. Someone inside is reporting to people who aren't loyal to him, Zuri said. Yes. And these people know about me. They have known about you since approximately week 2 of your pregnancy. They know which hospital you work at. They know your shift schedule. They know your home address. Lee Soo-yeon's eyes did not waver. They have not moved against you because they have been waiting to understand what you represent to Min-jae. Now they know. Because he came to the hospital. Because he sat in a public waiting room for 2 hours and walked out to the steps and waited for you in the morning and got into a conversation with you that 2 different sets of eyes observed and reported before either of you had finished your tea. She said it without heat, just facts. Whatever you and Min-jae are to each other, whatever this is, the council now understands that you are a vulnerability. And the council has never, in 20 years, left a vulnerability unaddressed. The lobby moved around them. 2 businessmen at the bar, a family checking in at the front desk, a child pulling on the handle of a rolling suitcase. All of it happening at a normal register while Zuri sat with the specific cold, settling that happens when something abstract becomes concrete and personal and pointed directly at you. "Why are you telling me this?" Zuri asked. Lee Soo-yeon was quiet for a moment. When she answered, something in her voice changed. Not softer exactly, but less controlled. More honest. Because I am not Min-jae's fiancée in any sense that matters. I am the daughter of a man who made an agreement with a man who is now dead, and I have spent 6 years managing the social consequences of an arrangement I never had the power to refuse. She looked at Zuri directly. I don't love him. He doesn't love me. We have been, for 6 years, 2 very capable people performing a function that benefits everyone except ourselves. So you want out? I have wanted out since before it started. The question has always been how. A pause. Min-jae has been trying to find a way to end the engagement without triggering a collapse that costs lives. He is more careful than people give him credit for. But careful takes time, and time has run out because the council has decided that your baby is either leverage or a threat, and they will act on that decision within the week. Zuri put both hands flat on the table. She needed the pressure, the solidity. What do they want? From Min-jae? His compliance. They want him to close certain operations he's been restructuring, operations that reduce their influence. They want the engagement maintained because the Lee family alliance gives them political cover they'd lose if it ended, and they want... She stopped. The pause was not for effect. It was the pause of a woman deciding to say the true thing. They want the child removed from the situation. The word removed sat in the air between them. Zuri's hands pressed harder against the table. Define removed, she said, and her voice came out completely level, which surprised her. There are several ways they might approach it. Pressure on you to leave the country, manufactured legal problems with your work visa, Or, Lee Soo-yeon held her gaze. More direct methods if the softer options don't produce results. The child moved. Under Zuri's ribs, slow and purposeful, that now familiar pressure that she had stopped being startled by in the 5th month. She felt it now with a sharpness that was almost physical pain, though it wasn't pain at all. It was the body saying, present, here, real. You said Min-jae doesn't know about Ryu Jae-won, Zuri said. No. If you tell him, when I tell him, his first move will be to eliminate the problem directly. He will lock down his organization, remove Ryu, and then turn every resource he has toward protecting you and isolating you from the threat. Lee Soo-yeon's eyes were steady, which is exactly what the council is counting on. They want him reactive. A reactive Min-jae makes mistakes. A Min-jae who is protecting a pregnant woman with every resource he has is a Min-jae who has told them precisely where to press. So telling him makes it worse. Telling him the wrong way at the wrong moment makes it worse. Zuri looked at the woman across from her. She thought about how she had expected this meeting to go. The fiancé, the confrontation, the territorial anger. She had prepared for a particular kind of conversation and gotten a completely different one. She was recalibrating in real time, and the recalibration was exhausting on top of everything else she was already carrying. What do you need from me? Zuri asked. 24 hours. Don't contact Min-jae until I've had time to position the information correctly. I have access to the council's communications through my father. I can give Min-jae what he needs to move against the council strategically rather than reactively if he receives it through the right channel at the right time. She unfolded her hands, refolded them. And I need you to not be where they expect you to be. Move, tonight. Don't go back to your apartment. I have a shift tomorrow evening. Call in sick. I have patience. Miss Brooks. Lee Soo-yeon's voice sharpened just slightly. The first crack in the composed surface. I understand your work matters to you. I understand that everything about this situation asks you to set aside the life you have built, and I recognize what that costs. But I'm telling you that there are men who have your home address and have been told that you are a liability, and I need you to take that as seriously as it is. Silence. Zuri thought about the apartment, the small kitchen, the drawer where she kept the baby things she'd bought slowly, 1 or 2 items at a time, telling herself she'd organize it properly before the birth. The ultrasound she had burned and the new ones she had kept, tucked in the back of a folder with her medical paperwork, because burning the second one had felt different. It had felt like burning the baby itself, and she couldn't do it. Where do I go? She asked. Somewhere they don't have on file. A colleague's place. A hotel you pay for in cash. Anywhere that isn't in the pattern of your last 4 months. Lee Soo-yeon reached into her bag and set an envelope on the table between them. Cash. For the hotel. Don't use your card. Zuri looked at the envelope. She didn't touch it. You came prepared. I've been planning this conversation for 10 days. No apology in it, just the fact. Zuri picked up the envelope. She felt its weight. She put it in her bag. 24 hours, she said. 24 hours. Zuri stood. Her back had stopped complaining and gone into a different register, a deeper ache that she associated with days when she'd been upright too long and not drunk enough water. She straightened carefully. Why? She asked. She hadn't planned to ask it. It came out anyway. You could have said nothing, stayed out of it, let the council handle it however they were going to handle it, and in the aftermath, Min-jae would have had to stay in the arrangement because there was nothing pulling him out. Lee Soo-yeon looked up at her. And for the first time in the entire conversation, she looked like a person rather than a position. Because I have been performing a function for 6 years, she said quietly, and I would like, before I'm 40, to be done performing functions and start making choices. She paused. You choosing to have that child alone, without asking anything from anyone, I understand that more than you might think. Zuri held her gaze for a moment. She nodded once, not warmth, not alliance exactly, recognition. She left the hotel. The cab ride back across the city felt different from the morning cab. The city looked the same, but she was reading it differently now. Every parked vehicle a question, every face at a crosswalk a possibility. This was a miserable way to move through a place she had lived for over a year, and she recognized the feeling as exactly the kind of paranoia that was not paranoia when it was warranted. She called Min Seo from the cab. I need a favor, she said. Big one. Minseo's voice was careful. What kind? I need somewhere to stay for a day or two, not my place. I'll explain when I get there. A pause. Then, I have a spare room. My building has a code entry. Come. Zuri exhaled. Thank you. Are you safe right now? Right now, yes. Okay. Come. She didn't go to her apartment first. She thought about it. She needed clothes, she needed her prenatal vitamins, she needed the folder with her medical paperwork. And then she thought about what Lee Soo-yeon had said about men who had her address, and she went directly to Minseo's building in Mapo and texted her the cab arrival time. Minseo met her at the door without asking questions. She saw Zuri's face and ushered her in and made her eat something real before she let her explain anything, which was the most practical and caring thing anyone had done for her in the entire day. Later, sitting on Minseo's couch with a blanket over her lap and a bowl of soup going cold on the table because she'd forgotten to eat it, Zuri explained enough. Not everything. Enough. Minseo listened. Her face went through several things. She was not a woman who dramatized. She managed trauma for a living, which meant she had a very calibrated internal scale for what warranted visible alarm. She was visibly alarmed. You have to tell him, Minseo said. Not yet. Zuri, 24 hours. I made a commitment. You made a commitment to a woman you met once who handed you cash in a hotel lobby. Minseo's voice was not loud, but it had an edge. That's not... She knew things she couldn't have known if she wasn't telling the truth. She knew specific things. Zuri pressed her fingers against her eyes. I'm not an idiot, Minseo. I'm making a calculated decision. You're making a decision while you're exhausted and frightened and 5 months pregnant and running on about 3 hours of sleep. Yes, Zuri said. That's the situation. That's what I have to work with. Minseo sat back. She looked at Zuri with the expression of someone who has lost an argument and knows it and is choosing to be useful instead of right. What do you need? She asked. Sleep. And if anyone calls your phone asking about me, I don't know where you are. Thank you. She slept on Minseo's couch because the spare room had boxes in it that Minseo hadn't unpacked from a move 8 months ago, and the couch was wide enough and Minseo found a long pillow for her knees. She slept for 6 hours, which was more than she'd expected. She woke to the sound of her phone and the number she had not called. Min-jae. She stared at the screen. Let it go to voicemail. It called again. She let it go again. Then a text. Your neighbor says you didn't come home last night. Where are you? Not a question. A statement with a question's content. She could hear the controlled tension in it, even as text. She typed, I'm fine, I'm somewhere safe, give me until tomorrow. His response came in 11 seconds. That's not an answer, it's the one I have, please. 40 seconds. Then, I need to know you're not in danger. I'm not in danger right now. Another pause. She could feel him on the other side of the screen making the decision between what he wanted to do and what she was asking him to do, and she was genuinely uncertain which one would win. Tomorrow morning. If I don't hear from you by 8, I'm going to find you. She believed him completely. 8 a.m. I'll call. She put the phone down and lay back and looked at Minseo's ceiling and thought, one more day, and then this is his problem to solve and I step back and let him solve it. She had no idea how wrong that plan was. The call from Lee Soo-yeon came at 4 a.m. Not a call. A text. 5 words. It moved faster. I'm sorry. Zuri sat up. Her heart was already running before she was fully awake. She called the number back. It rang 6 times and went to a generic voicemail. She called again. Same. She sat in the dark of Minseo's living room with the blanket falling off her shoulders and tried to construct from 5 words what had happened. It moved faster. The council. Something had changed, or she had been seen, or the meeting at the hotel had been observed, or Lee Soo-yeon's access to the council's communications had been discovered, or some combination of things she couldn't see from where she was sitting had collapsed the timeline from 72 hours to... What? Hours? Less? She called Min-jae, 4 a.m., and she called him. He answered on the second ring, which told her he hadn't been sleeping. Where are you? He said, not a greeting. Mapo, I'll send you the address. She was already moving, finding her shoes. Something's happened. I don't have all of it. I'll explain when you get here, but you need to come now. A pause that lasted exactly 1 breath. I'm coming. And Min-jae. She stopped. shoe in hand. There's something I need to tell you before you get here, something you're going to be angry about. What? I met with Lee Soo-yeon yesterday. The silence that followed was not the silence of a man who had nothing to say. It was the silence of a man choosing very carefully what to say first, which was more frightening. Don't go anywhere, he said, and his voice had dropped into a register she hadn't heard before. Controlled and cold, in a way that had nothing to do with anger at her and everything to do with something activating behind his eyes, that she was only now beginning to understand was what he was when the performance of ordinary life fell away. I'm not going anywhere, she said. He was at Min Seo's building in 19 minutes. She had been counting. He came through the door, and the first thing he did was look at her, all of her, head to feet and back, with the systematic attention of someone running a damage assessment. Whatever he saw satisfied him enough to exhale. Then he looked at her with an expression she could not name, except to say it was the most unguarded thing she had seen on his face. Tell me everything, he said. Every word she said. She told him. All of it, in order, as precisely as she could reconstruct it. He listened without interrupting, standing in Min Seo's living room with his arms at his sides. And his face did not change much, but his stillness changed quality, becoming denser, more concentrated, the stillness of a man processing at speed behind very controlled features. When she got to Ryu Jae-won's name, something happened to his eyes. She stopped talking. The room was quiet. You know that name, she said. Yes. His voice was flat in a way that frightened her more than loudness would have. He's your head of security. He has been for 4 years. He said it like each word was being placed individually, carefully, so that none of them broke anything on the way down. He was at the hospital last night. He's the one who called me when Sung-woo was shot. The implication opened up between them. He was there when you saw me, Zuri said slowly. He was standing 12 feet behind me when I said your name. They looked at each other. He saw your face, Min-jae said. He saw me. He saw my reaction. Something moved through his expression. Not grief. The precursor to grief, the moment before a person understands the full shape of the thing they've lost. He reported to the council before I'd even sat down in the waiting room. Zuri pressed her hand against her sternum. The baby shifted, a slow movement, the body doing what it did regardless. What does this mean? For right now, tonight. What does it mean? Min-jae's phone was already in his hand. He made 2 calls, rapid, in Korean, and his voice in those calls was different from any version of him she had heard. Short, exact, no excess in any syllable, the voice of someone giving orders that will be followed without question or explanation. He hung up and looked at her. We're moving, right now. I have a location that isn't in any file Ryu has ever touched. Min Seo. Is she at risk? Zuri hadn't thought about that. The realization hit her with a cold unpleasantness. She doesn't know anything. I told her almost nothing. Then she's low risk. We tell her to contact no one about you until she hears from you directly. He was already moving toward the door. Where is she? Min Seo appeared in the hallway in a robe, alarmed, hair flattened from sleep, reading the room with the speed of a trauma nurse. Min-jae spoke to her directly. She's going with me. You don't know where. If anyone asks, she wasn't here. I'm sorry to put this on you. Min Seo looked at Zuri. One long look that asked a single question. Do you trust this? Zuri gave her one look back that said, I have to. Min Seo looked at Min-jae. If she calls me and I can't verify it's actually her, I'm going to the police regardless of who you are. Good, he said, and he meant it. That's the right answer. They were out of the building in 4 minutes. There was a car waiting. Not a conspicuous car, a plain sedan, different plates than anything she'd seen before. A driver she hadn't met who did not look at her in the rearview mirror after the first second. In the car, Min-jae sat beside her, and the space between them had changed again into something new. Something that was neither the rooftop nor the cafe nor the hospital corridor. Something that had weight and permanence to it. The sense of a line being crossed that could not be uncrossed. He took out his phone and made a 3rd call. This one longer. She caught enough to understand he was instructing someone to locate Ryu Jae-won and hold him. The word he used for hold she recognized from somewhere in the back of her 14 months of living in Seoul, and it did not mean simply detain. He hung up. He looked at the road ahead. His jaw was tight. Min-jae, she said. I know. What happens to him? He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had lost the operational flatness and become something more complicated. He has been with me since I was 25. I trusted him with things. He stopped. His hand was on his knee, and she watched his fingers press flat against the fabric, hard enough to whiten the knuckles briefly. He was at my father's funeral. I gave a speech, and he was in the front row, and I trusted him the way you trust someone who was there for something like that. She didn't say anything. There was nothing useful to say. The council has been using my own security apparatus against me, he said, for 8 months. Every protective measure I put in place, they already knew. Every move I made, he stopped again. They knew about you before I knew about you. They've been ahead of me since before any of this started. She watched his face. He wasn't performing the anger. He was holding it down with the same kind of muscle you use to hold a door closed against wind, and she could see exactly how much effort it took. What does the council want? She asked. What is the actual endgame? Control of the restructured operations, and the engagement sustained because my father made commitments to them that were tied to the Lee Alliance, and breaking those commitments cost them money and influence they've had for 20 years. He finally looked at her. And the removal of anything that destabilizes the arrangement. I'm the destabilization. Our daughter is the destabilization. His voice broke slightly on the word daughter, caught and steadied. An air outside the arrangement, a reason for me to end the engagement that has nothing to do with policy or negotiation and everything to do with something they can't argue with or buy. The car made a turn. The city thinned outside the window, giving way to a district she didn't recognize, less commercial, residential blocks with wider streets. I have to tell you something, Min-jae said. He had turned toward her slightly. In the half-light of the car, his face was stripped of everything except what it actually was. The appointment Thursday. I was going to come. I know. Not to claim something, not to... He searched for the words. I wanted to hear it, the heartbeat. I wanted to be in a room where everything stopped being about power and damage control and who is watching and just... He looked at his hands. I have not had a day in 11 years where I wasn't building or protecting or managing a consequence. I wanted 1 hour that was just that. Zuri looked at him for a long time. Her body hurt. She was running on fractured sleep and inadequate nutrition and a fear that had been sitting at a low simmer for 24 hours and was now climbing. And she was looking at a man who ran a criminal empire and had 4 years of trust destroyed in the space of a conversation, who was holding himself together with a precision that was both impressive and alarming. She thought about what Lee Soo-yeon had said, more careful than people give him credit for. She thought about the nursery she hadn't built yet, the drawer with the small things in it. When this is over, she said, not if, when, she made herself say when. We need to have a completely different conversation about what this actually looks like. All of it. Yes, he said. We do. But right now, the driver said something. Min-jae sat up. His phone lit up with a message, and she saw his face change as he read it. Not the composure fracturing, but the controlled cold settling in again, replacing everything warmer. What? She said. He turned the phone to show her. The message was from a number she didn't recognize. It was 2 lines. Ryu is already gone. He left the city 2 hours ago. The council knows where you are taking her. The car stopped. Not because they had arrived, because Min-jae told the driver to stop, and when the driver stopped, Min-jae sat very still for 3 seconds, looking at the message. And Zuri watched him understand that every move he'd made tonight, the calls, the car, the route, the location they were heading to, had been anticipated. The council wasn't reacting to him. They had never been reacting to him. They had been moving first. And somewhere in the city, men who had decided that Zuri Brooks and the child she was carrying were a problem to be solved were already where Min-jae thought he was taking her to safety. He looked at her. His face had gone to a place past composure, past anger, and past fear, and into something that was colder than either. Get out of the car, he said, quietly. Min-jae, right now, we move on foot. I need to make a call, and we cannot be in this vehicle. He was already opening his door. I'm sorry. I know you're tired. I know. He stopped. He reached across, and for just a moment his hand covered hers on the seat between them, and the touch was brief and not careful, the way a person reaches for something real when everything around them is unstable. I'm going to fix this. She looked at his hand on hers. She got out of the car. The night air was cold and the street was empty, and somewhere ahead of them, Min-jae was already on the phone in rapid Korean while Zuri stood on a pavement she didn't recognize in a city she had come to over a year ago to build something quiet and manageable and her own. And the baby under her ribs moved again with that same unhurried, with complete clarity that the life she had been trying to preserve had already ended. What came next was not going to be preservation. It was going to be something she didn't have a word for yet. The street had no name that Zuri could read in the dark. It was a narrow residential block somewhere between Mapo and the river, the kind of street that exists in every city as pure function. No shops, no foot traffic, just buildings with their lights mostly off, and the sound of distant vehicles on a larger road 2 or 3 blocks away. The cold came up from the pavement through her shoes. She wrapped her cardigan tighter across her front and watched Min-jae pace 4 steps in one direction, stop, pace back, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in Korean that was too fast and too low for her to catch anything except the tension running through every syllable like current through wire. He hung up. Made another call immediately. This one shorter. She watched his back, the set of his shoulders, the way he turned slightly away from her when the conversation got harder, not to exclude her, but because he was the kind of person who needed directional privacy to think, the way some people need to close their eyes. He hung up again and turned around. There's a building, he said. Yongsan District. Old warehouse that was converted. My father used it for storage and meetings before I took over. I decommissioned it 4 years ago. No record of it in any current file. Ryu would not have had access to anything that old. He paused. It's not comfortable. I'm not looking for comfortable, she said. The heat may not work. Min-jae, let's go. He looked at her for one moment, and she understood that the look was not doubt about the plan. It was the look of a man who was recalibrating something internal, some private accounting of what he owed, and to whom, and finding the numbers larger than he'd previously estimated. He made a gesture toward the end of the block. We walked 6 minutes to a different car, different driver, no connection to tonight's route. Okay. Can you walk 6 minutes? I've been walking my entire life, she said, and started moving. He fell into step beside her and said nothing, which she appreciated. The night was quiet around them in the specific way of 4 a.m., in a residential district. Not peaceful, just emptied of its daytime noise, the silence underneath everything becoming briefly audible. Her shoes were wrong for this. She'd put on the pair she'd worn to the hospital, which had some support, but not enough for a long day extended into a longer night, extended into whatever this was now. She didn't say anything about her shoes. The car was exactly where he'd said. A different driver, older, heavyset, a man who looked at Min-jae with an expression that was not quite military deference but had something of its discipline in it. He didn't look at Zuri at all, which she found both unsettling and professionally appropriate given the circumstances. The drive to Yongsan took 22 minutes. She counted because counting was something to do. Min-jae sat beside her in the back and spent 14 of those minutes on his phone, texting, not calling, which she understood was about being harder to intercept, and the other 8 minutes in a silence that was not relaxed but was, she thought, not unkind. At minute 6 of the silence, he said without preamble, I'm going to tell you something about Ryu Jae-won. She waited. When my father died, I was 24. There was a period, about 3 months, where I was not sure I was going to be able to hold the organization together. There were men inside who thought I was too young, and men outside who saw an opportunity. He kept his eyes forward. Ryu was the one who stayed in the room. Every meeting, every confrontation, every night where I was running the numbers and trying to figure out which alliance was going to crack first. He was there. A pause. I thought he stayed because he believed in me. Maybe he did, she said. At first. Min-jae was quiet for a moment. Maybe. People don't usually start as traitors. They usually get there through a series of choices that each seem justifiable at the time. She kept her voice even. That doesn't make it better, but it's usually how it works. He looked at her then. In the moving dark of the car interior, his eyes were difficult to read, but she felt the quality of the attention. You're being generous, he said, to a man you've never met who put you in danger. I'm being accurate, she said. There's a difference. The warehouse in Yongsan was on a block that smelled like river water and old industrial use. It did not look like a building anyone had entered recently. The facade was deliberately unremarkable, the kind of unremarkable that takes effort to maintain. The driver stopped 2 blocks away and did not come further. Min-jae had a key. Physical, not digital, the kind of key that couldn't be hacked or traced through a system. He let them in through a side door, and the inside was exactly what he'd warned her it would be. Cold, dim, the heat long since decommissioned, high ceilings that turned every small sound into a brief echo. But it was also unexpectedly dry, and there were crates that functioned as seating, and Min-jae found an emergency supply locker near the back wall that had 2 folded thermal blankets still in their packaging and a flashlight that still worked. He set the flashlight upright on a crate so it threw light at the ceiling, diffuse, manageable. He gave her both blankets without discussion. She took them without protest. She sat on a crate with the blankets around her and watched him work the phone. This was, she thought, what he actually was when stripped of everything else. Not the version he showed at charity galas or rooftop bars or hospital waiting rooms. This version. Moving with a focused efficiency, making decisions with the compressed authority of a man who had stopped doubting himself at some point in the last 11 years and hadn't started again. She was not sure if that was admirable or alarming. She suspected it was both. The council has 3 men, he said without looking up from the phone. Baek Sung-il is the eldest. He was my father's original consigliere. Finance, political connections, knows where every agreement is buried. Moon Tae-gu handles operations. Former military, which means he thinks tactically and he plans for contingencies. He paused. The third is Choi Dae-hyun. I have known Choi since I was 12 years old. He used to bring me books. She looked at him. He was close to your family. He was close enough that when my father was dying, he was in the room. The phone went into his pocket. He's the one who pushed hardest for the engagement. I thought it was because he respected the Lee family alliance. Now I understand it was because the Lee family alliance contains specific provisions about succession that protect the council's interests if I marry into that family and have a legitimate heir through that union. He finally looked at her. A child outside that union changes the succession mathematics entirely. Our daughter would have standing in the Dragon Empire that supersedes any arrangement made before her birth. Zuri processed this. She's a threat to them before she's even born. She's a disruption to a structure they've been maintaining for 20 years. He sat down on the crate across from her, for the first time since the car had stopped. He looked tired in a way he wasn't hiding. I should have seen Choi earlier. I should have... He stopped. His jaw tightened. He let the unfinished sentence go. It doesn't matter now. What matters now, she said, is what happens next. Yes. He leaned forward, forearms on his knees. The flashlight cut shadows across his face. I have 12 men I trust without reservation. Men whose loyalty I have tested in ways that go beyond what Ryu would have been able to compromise. I've been in contact with 3 of them tonight. By morning, I'll have a position on where the council is moving and what they're planning. And then? And then I end this. She looked at him. What does that mean, in concrete terms? He met her eyes. He did not look away and did not soften it. It means the council ceases to function. The men who have been operating against me from inside my own organization will be removed from any position where they can cause damage. The agreements that have given them their leverage will be dissolved. He paused. It will not be clean. Some of it will be ugly. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Are you telling me this because you want my permission? She asked. No. He said it simply. I'm telling you because you deserve to know what kind of man is sitting across from you. And because you have been making decisions about your life for the last 5 months without complete information, and I am not willing to give you incomplete information anymore. She sat with that. Outside the warehouse, the city made its distant nighttime sounds. A vehicle, something mechanical running somewhere, the river existing at the edge of everything. The flashlight hummed very slightly. Okay, she said. Okay? I hear you. I understand what you're saying. She pulled the blanket tighter. Do what you need to do. Something in his posture changed. Not relaxing. He didn't relax. She was not sure he was built for relaxing in situations like this. But something releasing that had been under pressure. His phone lit up. He looked at it and was on his feet in one motion. They found Ryu, he said. She started to stand. Stay. He stopped himself. She watched him stop himself, watched him actively override the instinct and reconstruct the sentence. Will you stay here? There are people outside this building as of 10 minutes ago. You are genuinely safer inside. She sat back down. How long? I don't know. He moved toward the door, stopped, turned back. There's water in the supply locker. Eat something if you can. If I'm not back in 2 hours. He pulled out a second phone, old model, physical keypad, held it out to her. Call the number already in it, only that number. Say, Blue Warehouse. The person will come. She took the phone. It was lighter than she expected. He looked at her for 1 second that was long enough to contain something neither of them said. Then he was gone. She sat in the cold warehouse and listened to the door close and did not let herself think about all the things that could go wrong in the next 2 hours. Because if she started that list, she would not stop, and stopping was the only way through. She found the water in the supply locker. She found a protein bar that was 2 years past its best-by date and ate half of it because her body was asking her to eat. She sat back down and put one hand on her stomach and said quietly, to no one, "We're okay. Right now, we're okay." The baby moved, that same slow roll. Elbow or knee or some part that she'd learned the name of when the baby had a face and a personality and a name she and Minji had not yet discussed because they had not gotten to that yet, had not gotten anywhere near the ordinary conversations that ordinary people in ordinary situations got to have. 40 minutes later, the side door opened. Not Min Jae. 2 men she had never seen. Both in dark clothing, both with the deliberate stillness of people trained to enter spaces without announcing themselves. They saw her, and the taller one said something in Korean that she caught the tone of without the meaning. Apologetic, maybe, or at least not threatening. Then Min Jae came through the door behind them, and she exhaled. He had a cut on his hand. His knuckle, split and bleeding slowly. The kind of injury that happens when a fist meets something with more resistance than expected. He was not moving like someone injured anywhere else. She catalogued this in 3 seconds. "Ryu?" she asked. "In custody." His voice was flat. He confirmed the council's timeline. "Which is?" He sat down. He pressed the bleeding hand against his thigh, not thinking about it, just managing it. "They have a team watching my primary residence. They assumed I'd take you there. It's the most defensible location I own. They planned to move when I was inside, containment scenario, use you and the baby to compel my agreement to the restructuring they want." "Compel," she said. "Yes." "They were going to use us as leverage." "Yes." She breathed. One breath, controlled. "Ryu told you all of this." Something moved across Min Jae's face. "He told me what I needed to know." She decided not to ask what that had cost. Some information she could hold without its context. "The council is meeting tonight," Min Jae continued. "Emergency session. Ryu's disappearance from the city will have alarmed them. They'll be at Baek Sung-il's compound in Bundang. Together." He looked at her directly. "All 3 of them. Together, in one location." The weight of what he was describing settled in the room. "Min Jae." She held his gaze. "If you move against all 3 of them at once, it ends," he said, cleanly. One operation, one night. No extended campaign, no escalating back and forth where they have time to use you against me. Or it fails and it becomes 3 times the war. It won't fail. You don't know that. I know what I have and what they have, and I know that every hour I wait is another hour they're maneuvering. His voice was not raised. It was very, very steady, which she understood was its own kind of intensity. "I have been careful my entire adult life. I have planned and anticipated and tried to manage consequences at every level. The council has been using that against me. They know I'll be careful. They know I'll calculate. They know I'll take the time to make it clean. That time is what they have been buying." She looked at him. "So you're going to stop being careful?" "I'm going to stop giving them the time they've been stealing." He stood. "Lee Soo-yeon gave me something. Before she went dark tonight, she sent a transmission record, internal council communications that document their agreement with Ryu. 14 months of coordination. Every instruction, every payment. It's enough to destroy them through legitimate channels as well. I'm sending it to 3 different people tonight. Journalists, a government official I trust, and the head of a rival family who has his own grievances with the council." He paused. "I'm going to hit them from every direction simultaneously. Legal exposure, operational pressure, and direct confrontation at Bundang. They won't have a direction to run. Zuri was quiet for a moment. Outside, Seoul existed at a distance, enormous and indifferent. What do you need me to do? She asked. Stay here until… No. She said it quietly, but it had edges. I'm not asking to come. I'm asking what I can actually do that helps. Because sitting in a cold warehouse for 6 hours waiting to find out what happens to my child's father is not something I'm capable of doing passively. So tell me what I can do from here. He looked at her. A real look. Not assessment, not calculation. Something that saw her. The medical records, he said. Lee Soo-yeon flagged that the council has a contact at your hospital's records department. Someone who accessed your prenatal file and provided information about your pregnancy timeline. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded piece of paper. Handwritten, she noted. Nothing digital. This is the person's name. If you can reach your hospital administrator by morning with this information, the access trail will be on internal servers. It becomes part of the documented pattern, corroborates the transmission records. She took the paper. She looked at the name. She recognized it. Not well, peripherally, a face in the administrative corridor she passed occasionally. I can do that, she said. It's not nothing, he said. It closes a gap in the documentation. I know it's not nothing. She folded the paper and put it in her cardigan pocket. Go, do what you need to do. He moved toward the door. One of the two men followed him. The other stayed. He'll stay with you, Min-jae said. She looked at the man who was staying. He met her eyes briefly, nodded once. Min-jae. He stopped. She looked at him across the warehouse floor in the upward thrown light of the flashlight, and she thought about what she wanted to say and how to say it, and whether saying it was tactically sound or just human and decided human was good enough. Come back. He held her gaze for 2 seconds. Yes, he said. He left. The next 4 hours were among the longest of her life, and she had worked a 72-hour stretch in her second year of nursing, which had previously held the record. She contacted the hospital administrator at 6 a.m. through the emergency administrative line, identified herself, cited a patient privacy breach, and named the person on the paper. She was professional and precise and did not explain more than was needed. The administrator asked if she was safe. She said yes. The administrator said she would pull the access logs immediately and contact hospital security. Zuri said thank you and hung up. She drank the rest of the water. She tried to eat more of the protein bar and couldn't. At 6:40 a.m., her phone, her own phone, not the backup, rang with a number she recognized as Lee Soo-yeon's secondary contact. She answered. He's at Bundang, Lee Soo-yeon said. Her voice was different from the hotel meeting. Something had been stripped off it, leaving something rawer. The confrontation is happening. Baek and Moon are contained. A pause. Choi Dae-hyun is not at the compound. He left 2 hours ago. Zuri stood up. Where did he go? We don't know yet. He has a vehicle and a phone we can't locate, and he knew the compound was compromised. He must have had a signal, a contingency. A pause. Zuri. Choi is the one with the longest relationship with Min-jae. He's also the one with the most to lose personally if the council falls. He's not a man who accepts loss. Where would he go? Zuri said. If he was going to make a move on his own, somewhere unexpected, somewhere that resets the leverage. Lee Soo-yeon's voice was controlled, but the control was costing her. Somewhere Min-jae would have to leave Bundang to respond to. The cold in the warehouse was exactly as cold as it had been for 4 hours. Zuri's feet were numb. Her back had stopped hurting because it had gone past hurting into a general physical exhaustion that encompassed everything below her ribs. None of that mattered right now. He's coming here, she said. I don't know. He's the one with the longest relationship. He knows things about Min-jae's father's history that aren't in any file Ryu had access to. An old decommissioned warehouse that Min-jae's father used. She was moving as she talked, toward the man who had stayed, who was already on his feet reading her body language. He's coming here. The man said something in Korean. She didn't catch all of it, but she caught now and door, and she was already moving. The side door opened before they reached it. Choi Dae-hyun was 63 years old and looked like someone's university professor. Silver-haired, slightly built, the kind of face that belonged in a library rather than a place like this. He came through the door with 2 men behind him and a composure that was so complete it read, in the first second, as calm. Then she saw his eyes. He was not calm. He was past calm, into the place where a person has already made the decision they're going to have to live with. He looked at Zuri. His face did something she hadn't expected. Not triumph, not aggression, something more complicated, something that looked almost like regret. "Miss Brooks," he said. His English was precise, British inflected, the English of expensive education. "I apologize for the circumstances." The man who had been guarding her stepped forward. Choi's two men moved in response. A standoff with geometry, angles, positions, the wordless calculation of people assessing whether violence was necessary yet. "You don't have to do this," she said. "I'm afraid the situation has moved past what I have to do." He stayed near the door. He wasn't advancing, she noticed. He was positioning. "Minjai is brilliant. I have always known that. But brilliance requires an opponent to reveal itself against, and I have been that opponent longer than he knows." He looked at her directly. "You are not someone I want to harm. I want that to be clear. You are a mechanism, a point of pressure. That is all." "I'm a pregnant woman in a cold building," she said. "That's what I am." "Yes." Something moved across his face. "And you're carrying the future of an empire that took 20 years to build and cannot be restructured by one man's personal sentiment about the woman he loves. Is that what you think this is? Sentiment? Isn't it?" She looked at him. Her hands were at her sides. The baby was very still, the way it got still sometimes before a big movement, gathering itself. "You've been part of Minjay's life since he was 12. You brought him books." A pause. "Yes." "What did he read?" Choi blinked. The question was not what he'd prepared for. "History," he said after a moment. He liked military history, strategy. He read Sun Tzu at 14 and argued with me about the translation. "And you think," she said, "that a man who read Sun Tzu at 14 and spent his entire adult life learning how to think 3 moves ahead would bring me somewhere without accounting for the possibility that you knew about it?" The silence was very specific. Choi looked at her. Then his eyes moved to the warehouse, to the corners of it, the upper reaches, the shadows that the flashlight didn't reach. "He knew," Choi said slowly, "that I would come here." "He left me here," Zuri said, "with one guard, in a location you would know about, at the moment when you would be running out of options and making your most desperate choice." She held his gaze. "Where do you think his other 11 men are right now?" The 2 men behind Choi moved first, instinct, turning toward the shadows, hands reaching. And then the warehouse filled with the sound of movement from 4 directions at once, controlled and very fast, and the lights came on. Not the flashlight, but actual lights, full and white, flooding everything with the sudden brutal clarity of exposure. Minjay walked in through the main door. He was not uninjured. There was blood at his shoulder. His jacket was dark enough to have hidden it in lower light, but the warehouse lights found it. And he was moving with a slight compensation in his left arm, a careful management of the range of motion, the movement of someone who has been hurt and is not letting it matter yet. He looked at Choi Dae-hyun. Choi looked back at him. It was the look of 2 people who know each other in the way that only shared history creates, real history, not the performance of it, and who have arrived at the end of something that neither of them fully chose. "Minjay," Choi said. "Sit down," Minjay said, quietly. "The boy I taught." "Sit down." Still quiet, still controlled, but underneath the quiet was something tectonic, the movement of things that had been pressed down for a very long time finding the crack. Choi sat. Minjay walked to Zuri. He stopped in front of her and looked at her with the systematic attention he'd used at the hospital doorway, checking, cataloging, making sure. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No." He exhaled. His left hand, the injured side, came up briefly and then stopped before it reached her, and she understood that he'd stopped it deliberately, not wanting to reach for her in front of the men in the room, not wanting to show the thing that Choi had called sentiment. She reached for his hand instead. She took his wrist gently and turned it enough to see the injury at the shoulder in better light. The jacket was torn. The blood was real but not arterial. She read it with 5 years of ER experience in 2 seconds. "You need stitches," she said. "Later. Now, or it's going to be significantly worse later." "Zuri." His voice had an edge. "I'm a nurse. This is my area. Don't tell me later." She looked around the warehouse. Is there a first aid kit in that supply locker? One of the men, she'd stopped being able to track which were Min-jae's and which had been Choi's, moved to the supply locker and came back with a kit that was more comprehensive than she'd expected. Medical supplies, sealed packaging. She opened it. Sit, she said to Min-jae. He sat on the crate. She pulled gloves from the kit. She worked. Around them, the warehouse held its collection of people. Choi sitting with two of Min-jae's men beside him, the other men positioned at every exit, the whole extraordinary situation of the morning suspended in the white warehouse light. Beck and Moon, she said quietly, working. Contained, he said. The documentation went through at 5:40 a.m. There's a government response team already mobilized. Lee Soo-yeon. She's safe. She made the transmissions from her father's home in Busan. Her father, it turns out, had his own long-standing grievances with the council's arrangements. A pause as she applied pressure, and he absorbed it without making sound. The engagement is dissolved. As of this morning, by mutual agreement, her father and I reached that agreement by phone at 4 a.m. She paused in her work. Both of you wanted out. Both of us, he confirmed. She had been looking for a way for longer than I had. She resumed. The wound was clean enough for the materials she had. Not ideal, but functional. She worked with the focus she brought to everything clinical. Complete, in the moment, not about what came after. Choi knew about this location because your father used it, she said. Yes. His voice was even, but she could hear the specific quality in it, the careful management. He was present at many of the meetings here. I chose it tonight because I needed him to come somewhere I controlled that he believed he knew better than I did. You used the warehouse as bait. I used Choi's knowledge of my father's history as bait, he said, and I used... He stopped. You used me, she said. The pause was 1 second. I made a calculation, he said, that you would be safe inside this building with the guard I left, for the time it took for Choi to make his move and for me to finish at Bundang and come here. I made that calculation and I believed it was correct. He paused again. Was it wrong of me to make it? She finished the last piece of the wound management. She stripped the gloves and looked at him. It was wrong of you not to tell me you were making it, she said. If I'd known, I wouldn't have been frightened. I could have been useful instead of reactive. He held her gaze. You're right. I know. I'm not accustomed to... He stopped. Started again differently. The people in my life have for a very long time been people I manage information around, for their protection or for operational reasons. He looked at his hands. I don't know how to do this the other way yet. You're going to learn, she said. Not as a threat, as a fact. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, the situation was too much still an active situation for that, but the precursor to something. The terrain where a smile might eventually grow. His phone went off. He looked at it. She watched his face change again, the operational mode dropping back over everything like a panel closing. There's a development at Bundang, he said. He stood. His shoulder rolled slightly and she saw him register the stitched area and consciously stabilize it. I need to deal with this personally. Okay. He looked at her. There's a car outside. My man will take you to a location, a safe house, proper one, warm, stocked. I'll come as soon as I can. How long? A few hours? By afternoon. He hesitated. I'll call when I'm on the way. She stood. The blankets fell from her shoulders and she let them. She was cold and exhausted and her feet were numb and her back was a sustained complaint and none of that was going to stop being true regardless of what she said next. The Thursday appointment, she said. It's still in 2 days. He looked at her. Heartbeat, she said. You said you wanted to hear it. Something happened to his face. The operational panel didn't break, but something came through it anyway, from whatever was behind it. I'll be there, he said. Then get this done, she said. So you can. He held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then he turned to address the room, his men, Choi, the situation, and his voice shifted back into the register she now understood was his command voice, the one that had no uncertainty in it, and she watched the men around him reorganize themselves in response to it, the way things reorganize in response to gravity. She walked to the car. The driver was different again. She'd lost count of how many drivers had been part of this night. She sat in the back and the city moved past the window toward pale morning, and she put her hand on her stomach and felt the baby, still and present, and thought, we made it through the night. The safe house was in a district she'd never been to, a private apartment building with security at the entrance, and the apartment itself was exactly what he'd promised. Warm, stocked, the heat already running when she walked in. Someone had been here recently, setting it up. She didn't think about who. She ate. Real food. There was soup in the refrigerator, a container of rice, fruit. She ate standing at the counter because sitting felt too much like stopping, and stopping still felt dangerous, which she recognized as an adrenaline problem she was going to need to process later. She showered. She found clothes in the bedroom shit. She didn't ask, she just put them on. And she sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the wall and felt the day pressing against the backs of her eyes with everything it had been. Her phone rang. Min Jae. The situation at Bundang is resolved, he said. He sounded tired for the first time. Real tired, not operational. Both men are in custody of people who will process them through channels I trust. The documentation is circulating. By evening there will be... He paused. It will be news. Some of it will be public. Are you safe? A beat. Yes. Your shoulder? Functioning. That's not what I asked. It hurts, he said. Is that what you wanted to know? Yes, she said. That's actually what I wanted to know. A silence that was different from the earlier silences, less charged with emergency, something quieter underneath it. I'm going to need several hours to finalize certain things, he said, and then I'm coming to you. Okay. Zuri. His voice was different here at the end of the sentence, stripped of the operational layer. I need to say something. She waited. When I walked into that warehouse tonight and I saw you standing there with Choi, he stopped. She heard him stop. She heard the thing behind the stop, the specific difficulty of a man reaching for a language he hasn't used often enough to use easily. I have made decisions in the last 11 years that I believed were correct. Strategic, necessary. I have accepted the costs of those decisions because I understood the accounting. Min Jae, I don't know how to account for you, he said. I don't have a framework for it. You are not a strategic asset or a variable I can manage or a problem I can solve with the right resources deployed at the right time. Another pause. I don't know what to do with something I can't protect through sheer force of organization. She was quiet for a moment. You can start, she said, by showing up Thursday at 11 a.m. A long exhale. Yes. And then we can figure out the rest of it. Together? She looked at the wall of the apartment that was not hers, in a city she had come to alone, carrying a daughter who was going to arrive into whatever world the two of them built between now and then. Together, she said. She hung up. She lay down on the bed, on her left side, pillow between her knees, the way you're supposed to. And the morning light was coming through the curtains in thin lines, and somewhere in the distance, Seoul was doing what it always did, enormous and continuous and indifferent to the particular drama of two people trying to find solid ground in the wreckage of a night that had changed every boundary of their lives. She closed her eyes. The baby moved once, slow and certain, like punctuation, like the end of one sentence and the breath before the next one begins. She slept for 6 hours without dreaming. When she woke, the light through the curtains had changed from thin morning lines to the fuller, flatter light of midday, and for exactly 3 seconds she didn't know where she was. Then the ache in her lower back reminded her, and the unfamiliar ceiling confirmed it, and the whole previous night landed on her chest with its full weight. She lay still for a moment and let it settle. Then she got up, because that was what she did. The apartment was quiet, in the specific way of spaces that have been prepared for someone rather than lived in. Everything was exactly where it should be, and nothing was worn in or casually displaced the way things get in a place someone actually calls home. She moved through it slowly, testing her body's inventory, feet still slightly numb from the cold warehouse hours, back complaining but manageable. The deep fatigue of someone who had been running on adrenaline for 12 hours and had now come down from it into a tiredness that had texture and weight. She found coffee, real coffee, ground, in a sealed container in the cabinet above the machine. She stood at the counter while it brewed and watched the steam, and did not think about anything particularly, which was its own form of recovery. Her phone had 6 messages. Her hospital administrator had called twice. The second message confirming that the access breach had been documented, The records had been flagged, and hospital security was coordinating with an outside investigative contact who had reached out within the hour of her initial report. The name on the paper Min Jae had given her had been placed on administrative leave pending a full audit. A text from Min Seo. "Are you alive? Please respond." She typed back, "Alive, whole. We'll explain everything soon. I'm sorry for the worry." The response came in 40 seconds. "Don't apologize. Just stay that way." 2 missed calls from a number she didn't recognize. She let those go. 1 text from Lee Soo-yeon's secondary contact, which said only, "It's done. Take care of yourself." She poured the coffee. She couldn't have it strong, not anymore, but she made it anyway and sat at the small table near the window and drank it slowly and looked at the neighborhood outside. Ordinary, mid-morning, people moving with the purposeful ordinariness of people who had not spent the previous night in a cold warehouse waiting to find out whether the father of their child was going to survive the confrontation he'd walked into. She was 4 paragraphs into composing a text to Min Jae when her phone rang with his name on the screen. "You're awake," he said. "I've been awake for a while." She put the coffee down. "Where are you? Finishing something?" A pause. She could hear background noise, voices, something moving. "An hour, maybe less. The last of the documentation needs to go to a specific contact before noon or it misses the window. I'm handling it in person." "Your shoulder?" "Stiff, functional." Another pause. "I had someone look at it." "Someone medical or someone who just said it looked okay?" "Someone with more qualifications than that." She could hear something in his voice that was not quite amusement, too tired for amusement, but adjacent to it. "A doctor, an actual doctor." "Good." She looked at the window. "Min Jae, Choi Dae-hyun." The pause this time was different, weighted. "He'll face the same legal process as Beck and Moon," Min Jae said. "The documentation covers all 3 men equally. There is enough evidence to hold them through legitimate channels: financial crimes, conspiracy, misuse of the organizational structure." His voice was even. She had learned to read the evenness now, to hear what it was holding down. "He will not go to prison for what he intended to do to you last night. He'll go to prison for 20 years of financial fraud and conspiracy, which is—" He stopped. "Which is enough," she said. "It's not enough," he said. "But it's what the law can do, and using the law is—" He paused again. "I have enough power to be dangerous when I'm angry. I don't want to be that. Not anymore. Not with—" He didn't finish the sentence. "The law is slower and more frustrating, and it's what I'm using." She sat with that for a moment. The morning before last, she would not have predicted that sentence from him. She wasn't sure what it cost him to mean it. "That matters," she said quietly. "I know. I'm not just saying it. It matters." A silence that was not empty. "An hour," he said. "Less if I can manage it. I'll be here." She was in fact not entirely still for the hour. She called her nurse manager, not her administrator, her direct manager, the woman who had covered her shifts and never once made her feel guilty for the pregnancy, and gave her a condensed, carefully edited version of the last 48 hours. She said there had been a security situation involving a personal matter and that it was now being addressed through appropriate channels. She said she would need a few days and would provide documentation from the hospital's own security team. Her manager asked 3 questions, all of them practical, and then said, "Take what you need. You know where to find me." She ate more of the food from the refrigerator. She found that someone had stocked it with things that were specifically appropriate for a pregnant woman in the 3rd trimester. Not an accident, not a coincidence. Someone had been instructed to pay attention to that detail, and the someone had done it correctly. She ate without examining the feeling that produced too closely, because some things needed more distance before they could be properly assessed. She was sitting on the couch with her feet up on the coffee table, her lower back finally at something approaching a truce, when she heard the entrance code being entered downstairs. Min Jae came through the door and stopped. She was, she imagined, not a picture of anything particularly composed. Hair still damp from the shower she'd taken an hour ago, wearing clothes she hadn't chosen, sitting in someone else's apartment with half a cup of cold coffee on the table and the particular undignified reality of late pregnancy on full display. She had stopped, somewhere in the last 24 hours, carrying what she looked like in front of him, which was either a regression or a breakthrough, and she didn't have the energy to decide which. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the warehouse. The damage assessment that became something else. He closed the door. He came and sat on the other end of the couch, not right beside her, giving her space, which she noted. And he looked at her for a moment without saying anything. "You look terrible," she said. "I know." He did. The shoulder injury had stiffened his left side visibly. There were shadows under his eyes so deep they looked structural. His jacket was gone and his shirt had been changed, but not by much, the new one already carrying the compression of a long day. He looked like a man who had run at full capacity for 36 hours and had not yet been given permission to stop. "Sit back," she said. He looked at her. "You're holding your left side up through sheer determination," she said. "Sit back." He sat back. She watched the careful way he moved his shoulder as he settled, the micro-adjustments of someone managing pain with the specific discipline of a person who has decided the pain is not relevant. "Tell me what's done," she said. "All of it, so I have the whole picture." He told her. It took 20 minutes, and he was thorough in a way that she understood was partly for her benefit and partly because he needed to say it all out loud, needed to hear it organized and completed. Baek Sung-il and Moon Tae-gu were in the custody of a government anti-corruption unit that had been building a case against the Dragon Empire's financial infrastructure for 3 years. Min Jae had been quietly cooperating with that unit for 8 months, which was part of what the council had been trying to stop. The cooperation had now been formalized. In exchange for verified documentation of the council's parallel criminal operation, distinct from the Dragon Empire's legitimate business holdings, which were considerable, Min Jae had secured an agreement that gave him a structured path toward the thing he had apparently been building toward for longer than anyone outside his most trusted circle had known. Legitimacy. Not all of it, not overnight, but a real, legal, enforceable restructuring of the Dragon Empire's operations that would, over a period of years, shift the organization's primary income and influence into territory that did not require the particular kind of violence and extra-legal maneuvering that had defined it since his father's generation. "You've been planning this for 8 months, she said. "Longer than that," he said. "Thinking about it for longer. Planning concretely, 8 months. The council discovered the cooperation with the government contact 4 months ago, which is when they began pressuring Ryu. The irony," he paused, "the irony is that the restructuring, if successful, would eventually have diminished the council's power anyway. They were trying to stop something that was coming regardless. They just accelerated the timeline by overreaching." She looked at him. "Why didn't you tell anyone? Your lieutenants, your—" "Because the more people who know, the more surface area there is for it to collapse." He looked at his hands, which were resting in his lap, one of them still with the split knuckle from the previous night. "I have spent 11 years building an organization that operates on loyalty and information control. The same discipline that keeps the organization functional is the thing that made me isolated when I needed not to be." He looked up. "I told no one because I didn't trust the way I trust this kind of thing, and I was alone with it." She was quiet for a moment. "You're not going to be alone with things anymore," she said. "That's not a request. It's a condition." He held her gaze. "A condition. One of several we need to discuss." She shifted slightly. The baby had repositioned itself during the conversation, a slow adjustment that she felt as pressure on her right side. "The engagement is dissolved. As of this morning, Soo-yeon and I spoke again at 7. She has already contacted her family's legal team. The formal dissolution will be processed within the week. Something moved across his expression. "She asked me to tell you that she hopes you'll raise your daughter to know that women can be on the same side." Zuri looked at him. Then she looked at the window. "She's a remarkable person," she said. "Yes," he said. "She is. I'd like to thank her. In person, eventually. When things have—" She gestured vaguely at the general complexity of their current situation. "I'll make sure that happens." She turned back to him. I was watching her with the quality of attention she had identified over the course of knowing him as the thing that was most essentially him. Not the power, not the controlled presence, but the way he paid attention to her specifically, as though she were the thing most worth attending to in whatever room they were in. "I burned the first ultrasound," she said. He went still. "The night I decided I was going to do this alone, I stood over the kitchen sink and I burned it. I thought—" She looked at her hands. "I thought it would feel like a decision, like something finalizing. Instead, it felt like nothing, which scared me more than grief would have. She looked up. I've kept everyone since. They're in a folder in my apartment. He was quiet. His eyes had the look of a man hearing something he's processing at a level below his usual speed. I want you to know that, she said, because I want you to understand what the last 5 months were. I wasn't waiting for you. I wasn't angry at you. She stopped, started again differently. I was trying to protect both of us from a situation where you felt obligated, and I felt like a complication. I thought I was being generous. I think I was also being afraid. You weren't a complication, he said. His voice was low. I know that now. You were the thing. He stopped. He was having the same difficulty she had seen in the car the night before, reaching for a language that didn't come easily. On the rooftop, that night, I am not a person who gets surprised by other people. I've spent my entire life learning to read people before they open their mouths. You surprised me. He looked at her directly. You asked me if I was happy. Nobody had asked me that, and he stopped again. I couldn't answer it because I hadn't asked myself in a very long time, and the reason I hadn't was because the answer was no, and I had arranged my life very carefully around never having to sit with that answer. The apartment was warm. Outside, the city moved. The coffee on the table was fully cold. And now? She asked. He looked at her for a long moment. His left shoulder was settling slightly, the held-up tension easing by degrees. His hands were in his lap, and he was not performing anything. Not composure, not strength, not the particular bearing of a man who commands rooms for a living. He was just sitting in a warm apartment in the midday light, tired and injured and present. Now, he said, I think the answer is different. She nodded. She didn't push it further because some things don't need to be pushed further, and because his face said everything the sentence had been reaching for. Thursday? She said. The appointment is at 11. I want you there. I'll be there. And after, she put her hand on her stomach. We need to talk about the actual practical things. Where we live, what that looks like, what kind of access you have, and what kind of access I'm comfortable with, how we make decisions about her, without either of us losing the right to be a full person with opinions that don't always match. She looked at him steadily. You have an impulse to manage situations. I have an impulse to wall off and handle things alone. We are going to drive each other absolutely insane if we don't build something deliberately. I know. That means talking, actual talking, not information management. I know, he said again. And then, I'm not good at it. I'm not always good at it either. She held his gaze. We'll be bad at it together until we get better. That's how it works. He looked at her for a moment. The edge of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, still too much weight in the day for that, but the genuine predecessor of one. You're not afraid of me, he said. It wasn't an observation, it was something more like wonder. I was, she said. A little. In the beginning. Not of what you might do. Of what getting it wrong would cost. She was quiet for a moment. I'm not anymore. Why not? She thought about it honestly. Because you had every opportunity to be someone I needed to be afraid of, and you kept choosing not to be. She looked at the window. You showed up Thursday, before I told you. You could have walked out of that hospital and never come back. Instead, you sat in a waiting room for 2 hours and then sat on the steps and waited for morning. She looked back at him. That's not a man I need to be afraid of. He was very still. The night we met, he said, on the rooftop, when you left. I stood at the elevator for, I don't know how long. I kept thinking I should have said something different, something that would have meant you'd come back. I came back, she said. Eventually. Eventually, he said. The word sat between them with everything it contained. She did not reach for him, and he did not reach for her. The distance between them on the couch was exactly the right distance for two people who had a great deal of territory still to cover and were choosing to be honest about how much of it was unmapped. Some things should not be rushed, even now, especially now, when the rushing was available and the emotion was real. What they had done and survived in the last 36 hours was not the same as what came after, and they both understood that the distinction mattered. You should sleep, she said, before you fall over. I have things to... Whatever things you have, she said, will still be things in 4 hours. Sleep. He looked at her. The left shoulder had come down another degree. The dark under his eyes was very real in the midday light. "The bedroom is at the back," she said. "I'll be here when you wake up." He stood, slowly, with the particular economy of motion of a person managing physical pain with the last of their willpower. He got to the doorway of the bedroom and stopped. "Zuri." She looked at him. "When she's born," he said. "Our daughter." He said the words like they were still new to his mouth, still requiring the deliberate attention that new things require. "I want to be in the room." She looked at him for a moment. The image of it, this man in that room for that specific unrepeatable moment, settled in her chest somewhere that she didn't have clinical language for. "You'll be in the room," she said. He nodded once. He went into the bedroom. She heard the particular small sounds of a person lying down carefully, managing the injured side, and then silence. She sat on the couch. She put her feet back up. Outside, the light continued its slow afternoon decline, and the city was exactly what it always was, and she breathed in the warmth of the apartment and let the silence be what it was. She was still there, almost asleep herself, when the baby moved. Not the slow roll she'd grown accustomed to, something more purposeful. A sequence of movements, elbow, knee, she could almost distinguish them now, had been learning the vocabulary of this particular body for 4 months, that felt, if she was attributing intention to something that had no intention yet, like commentary. She put her hand on her stomach. "I know," she said quietly. "A lot has happened." The movement slowed, then stopped. Then one more small push, low on her left side. She sat with her hand on her stomach in the warm afternoon apartment, and she did not try to make it into a metaphor or a message. It was what it was, a body, growing. A person in the early stages of becoming one. That was enough. The Thursday appointment was at the Mapo Women's Clinic, which Zuri had chosen 14 weeks ago for its waiting room chairs. An obscure criterion, but she spent a great deal of time in waiting room chairs, and these ones had actual lumbar support, which she had come to view as a moral position. She arrived 7 minutes early. She sat in one of the good chairs. Min-jae arrived 4 minutes early. He came through the clinic door in a coat she hadn't seen before. The injured shoulder was still slightly elevated in the way of someone managing a stiffness, but he moved otherwise like himself, present and deliberate. He looked around the waiting room, found her, and came to sit beside her. The chair next to hers had equally good lumbar support. He did not comment on the chairs. He sat in the one next to her and looked at the clinic wall, and the two of them sat in the waiting room of a women's health clinic in Mapo on a Thursday morning, like two people who had arrived at a thing together after a very long route. A woman across the room was looking at them with the specific peripheral attention of someone who is trying not to appear to stare. Zuri understood why. They were visually conspicuous for reasons she'd long since stopped being self-conscious about. She ignored it. Min-jae either didn't notice or made the same choice. "How's the shoulder?" she asked. "Better than yesterday." "Are you taking the antibiotics?" "Yes." "Both doses, or just the morning one?" He looked at her. "Both." "People always skip the second one." "I'm not people." She almost smiled. "No, you're not." When the midwife called her name, Min-jae stood with her. In the examination room, the midwife, a woman in her 50s who had been delivering babies in Seoul for 23 years and was not remotely unnerved by anything, looked at Min-jae with the brief professional assessment of someone cataloging his presence, and then returned her attention to Zuri without comment. They went through the routine measurements. Zuri's blood pressure was higher than the midwife wanted, which produced a short conversation about rest that Zuri received with the specific patience of someone who has been told to rest in the middle of circumstances that actively prevented resting. Min-jae, sitting in the chair against the wall, listened to the blood pressure conversation with an expression that she did not look at directly, but that she could feel, the focused attention of a man filing information as actionable. Then the midwife applied the gel, cold as it always was, and positioned the wand, and the room filled with the sound. The heartbeat. She had heard it before. Every appointment. She knew the rhythm of it, the specific pace and texture of this particular heartbeat, which had become over the past 4 months one of the most familiar sounds in her life. It was not new to her. She looked at Min-jae. He was leaning forward slightly, elbows on his knees, both hands clasped. His eyes were on the monitor, but she did not think he was seeing the image. She thought he was hearing, just hearing, the way he had said he wanted to. The way he had said he wanted 1 hour that was just that. His face did something she had not seen it do before. Not breaking. He didn't break. Nothing that dramatic. But something behind the controlled surface moved unmistakably, the way things move deep in water, the disturbance reaching the surface as something subtle that is somehow more revealing than anything louder would have been. He pressed his clasped hands harder together. His jaw was tight. His eyes were bright. The midwife said something technical about positioning and growth measurements, and Zuri answered in the appropriate places without looking away from Minjae's face. He noticed her looking. He did not look away. He met her eyes, and for a moment there was nothing between them. Not the history of the last 5 months, not the previous week, not the rooftop or the hospital or the warehouse or any of it. Just the two of them in a small clinic room listening to a heartbeat. He said nothing. He didn't need to. She looked back at the monitor. "She's in excellent position," the midwife said. "Strong heartbeat. Everything looks exactly as it should." Minjae exhaled, one long controlled breath, the kind that has had a lot of effort behind it. After the appointment, they walked. Not a planned walk. She came out of the clinic and turned and began walking, and he fell into step beside her, and neither of them suggested a destination or a stop. They simply walked through the Mapo streets in the mid-morning cold with their breath visible and the city going about its business around them. They walked for 30 minutes. She did not count this time. They talked. Not about any of the large things, not about the council or the restructuring or the practical conversations she had promised they needed to have. They talked about small things. She told him about the nurses she'd worked with, the ones who had become, without her fully planning it, her closest friendships and soul. He told her about a restaurant his father had taken him to when he was 8, the best meal he'd ever had, a place that no longer existed. She told him about her mother in Atlanta, the way her mother's voice changed on the phone when she was worried but trying not to show it. He told her about the parenting book he had bought. One book, not a stack. He said it with a specific precision that made her understand he had in fact bought a stack and was editing the admission in real time. "How many books?" she said. A pause. "Several." "Minjae." "7," he said. "I bought 7 books." She laughed. She had not laughed in, she could not immediately calculate how many days. It came out with more force than she expected, and she felt it in her chest, real and involuntary. And when it subsided, she felt lighter in a way that was almost physical. He looked at her with the expression of a man who has just discovered that making her laugh is a thing he wants to do frequently and is already calculating how. "Read them," she said. "All 7. We'll compare notes." "You've read parenting books?" "I've read 2, and several articles and one extremely long forum thread that I cannot recommend." "Which 2 books?" She told him. He had not read either of them, which surprised her. She told him what she thought of both. He listened with the focused attention that was, she had come to understand, simply how he listened to everything, and asked a question that indicated he had actually heard what she said rather than just waiting for his turn. And they discussed infant sleep research for 4 blocks as though it were the most natural conversation in the world. And maybe it was, she thought. Maybe this was simply what it looked like. 2 people walking through a city in the cold, talking about books about sleeping babies, figuring out the ordinary shape of the thing they were building. She stopped at a corner. She was not tired exactly, but the 30-minute walk had used its quota and her lower back was beginning to comment. "Come to the apartment," she said. "Mine, not the safe house. I want to be in my own space." It's fine," she said. "If there were people watching it before, they don't have a reason to be there now." She looked at him. "Right?" "Correct," he said. "I had someone confirm the building is clean this morning." "Of course you did." She flagged a cab. "Come on." Her apartment, seen after 4 days of absence, looked both smaller and more like itself than she remembered. She moved through it, turning on lights while Minji stood in the entrance, looking at the space with the contained attention he brought to unfamiliar places. Not assessing for threat. Not anymore. Something else. Taking it in. "It's not a penthouse," she said from the kitchen. "No," he said. "I know you were going to say it's good." "I was going to say it looks like you." She turned around. He was still in the entrance, his coat on. He was looking at a series of things she had pinned to the wall near the small desk, printed photographs from home, a postcard her mother had sent, A sketch she'd bought at a market months ago because something about it had appealed to her in a way she hadn't analyzed. "She'll be here for a while," Minjae said. He was looking at the sketch. "Before anywhere else. She'll know this place." "That's the plan," Zuri said. "It's a good plan." She made tea. She gave him one and kept one, and they sat at the small kitchen table, the first surface in her actual life they had ever sat across together, and she thought about the cafe after the hospital, the hotel lobby, the warehouse crates. This was different. This was hers. She opened the drawer by the kitchen counter. She took out the folder. She set it on the table between them. He looked at it. "The ultrasounds," she said. "The ones after the first one." He looked at the folder for a moment. Then he looked at her, a question in it. "Open it," she said. He opened it. There were 4. She watched him go through them slowly, not rushing, looking at each one with the concentrated attention of someone reading something in a language they're still learning. She watched his face move through several things she didn't try to name, because some things are better observed than labeled. He stopped at the most recent one, 28 weeks. The clearest image, the one where the midwife had pointed out the specific curve of the nose, the position of the hands. He sat with that one for a long time. "She has a nose," he said. "Most people do," Zuri said. He looked up. His eyes were doing the thing they had done in the clinic. "She's a person. She's already a person." "She has been for a while," Zuri said gently. "You just didn't know." He looked back at the image. She let him have the time with it. The apartment was warm and the tea was good, and outside the afternoon was moving toward evening, and the city was doing exactly what cities do. And inside this particular small kitchen, 2 people were sitting at a table with 4 photographs between them, and the future still entirely unmapped, but, for the first time, genuinely shared. He closed the folder carefully. He set his hand on top of it for a moment, palm flat, the way you rest your hand on something you want to keep. "I want to be there for everything," he said. "Not just the large things, the appointments and the—" He was choosing words with care. "The ordinary things, the days that aren't significant. I want to be present for those." "Then be present," she said. "Show up. That's the whole instruction." "I can do that?" "It sounds simple. It isn't." "I know." He looked at her across the table. "I'm telling you I intend to do it anyway." She looked at him. This man. 11 years of building an empire, 24 years of managing consequences, a night in a warehouse, and a morning in a clinic, and now a kitchen table and a folder of ultrasounds, and a daughter who would arrive in approximately 10 weeks and change everything that had not already been changed. "Okay," she said. "Okay? Okay, I believe you." She wrapped both hands around her tea. "Don't make me regret it." "I won't." "You'll try not to. There's a difference." He looked at her for a moment. "You're always going to do that," he said. "Aren't you? Correct the imprecision." "Yes," she said. "So be precise." The edge of his mouth moved. This time it went further. An actual, genuine, arrived-at smile, not performed, not managed, not the social instrument of a man who has spent 11 years using every natural expression as a strategic tool. Just the thing itself, tired and real and slightly crooked on the side of his injured shoulder. She felt it somewhere in her chest that she was not going to try to locate precisely. She looked at her tea. "We should talk about the name," she said. He blinked. "Now?" "Not now, necessarily, but soon. She's going to need one." "Do you have—" He paused. "Have you thought about it?" "I've thought about it for 4 months," she said. "I have a short list. Can I—" "You can add to the list. It's a process, not a unilateral decision." "Understood." He was quiet for a moment. "My grandmother's name was Ji-ah." She turned the sound of it over. Ji-ah. "Tell me about her." He looked slightly surprised, as though he had not expected the follow-up. "She was the kind of person who was more honest than comfortable," he said. "She said exactly what she thought, and she expected you to be able to hear it. She outlived my grandfather by 20 years and spent those 20 years doing exactly what she wanted." A pause. "She terrified me when I was small. Later I understood that what I had mistaken for fear was actually respect." Zuri looked at him. "Jia Brooks Kong," she said. "Or Kong Jia Brooks." He considered it. "Both work. We can come back to it." "We'll come back to it." They sat with the name between them for a moment. feeling its weight, which was the specific and unrepeatable weight of a name that might belong to a person. Later, after the tea was finished and Min-jae had made 2 calls that he stepped briefly away to handle. The restructuring was an ongoing thing, she was beginning to understand, a long, careful process that would take years and not weeks. She found herself standing in the small room she had been slowly preparing, the one she had been adding things to in the months before everything else happened. She had not organized it properly. She'd said she would do that before the birth. There was a crib that needed assembly, still in its flat pack box. A chest of drawers with 2 of the pulls missing that she'd been meaning to replace. The small things she'd bought 1 or 2 at a time. Onesies, a soft blanket in yellow, a stuffed animal that was supposed to be a bear but looked more like a philosophical statement, arranged in the unorganized way of things waiting for their context. Min-jae appeared in the doorway behind her. She heard him take in the room in the particular quality of his silence. "The crib needs assembly," she said. "I can do that. It's about 70 pieces and the instructions are in Korean and probably also in whatever the diagram language is for furniture that makes no sense regardless of what language you read. I've assembled more complicated things." She turned to look at him. He was looking at the room, the unfinished room, the real room, the room with mismatched drawer pulls and a bear that wasn't quite a bear, and his face had the quality she was learning to recognize as his version of feeling, something he hadn't anticipated. "Tomorrow?" she said. "Tomorrow," he said. "I'll come in the morning. We'll do it right." She nodded. She turned back to the room. She looked at the yellow blanket on the top of the small pile, bright and waiting. 10 weeks. Give or take. She had come to Seoul to build something small and manageable and entirely hers. She had ended up here instead, in this apartment, with this man in the doorway, with this room waiting to be made real, with a daughter who had a provisional name and a strong heartbeat, and the specific rolling movement that Zuri now thought of as her hello. She had not planned any of it. She had not chosen it the way you choose things when you have all the information. She had chosen it the way you choose things under actual conditions, with incomplete data and genuine fear and the persistent stubbornness of a woman who had decided, standing over a kitchen sink at 2 a.m., that she was going to survive this. She had survived this. What came after surviving was not a simple thing. It was not easy or clean or guaranteed. It was a man who had to learn to talk instead of manage. It was a woman who had to learn to let someone else in without calling it weakness. It was an empire becoming something different, slowly, at a cost that was real. It was a daughter arriving into a world that was more complicated than anyone would have preferred, and more full of people who were already devoted to her than she would ever be able to fully know. It was enough. Min-jae came to stand beside her in the doorway of the unfinished room. He did not put his arm around her. He stood beside her and they looked at the room together. The waiting crib, the philosophical bear, the yellow blanket, the drawer pulls that still needed to be replaced. "We need a rug," he said. She looked at him. "The floor is cold," he said. "She'll be on the floor eventually. She'll need a rug." She looked at the floor. He was right. She hadn't thought about the rug. "We'll get a rug," she said. "A good one." "Yes." She looked at the room. A good one. They stood there in the doorway of the room that was not yet finished, in the apartment that was not yet ready, at the beginning of something that did not yet have a name, except the one they were giving it one day at a time, and the city outside continued in its enormous, indifferent way. And inside it, 2 people stood in the ordinary light of an ordinary afternoon and looked at the room where their daughter was going to learn that the world was a place where she was wanted. That was the whole of it. That was enough.